Hello everyone, welcome to PMF IAS Magnum Crash Course for Prelims 2025. I am Akshay Vrat and I'll be discussing the subject of environment and ecology with you. Now, in the discussion of environment and ecology, my primary focus, let me share the list of topics that I'm going to cover with you. I will be covering the entire syllabus under these heads. I'll start with the topic of climate change. All of you understand climate change is an ongoing topic. It's a very popularly asked topic in the UPSC Prelims now as well as in mains, but our focus would be mostly in prelims. We'll talk about its impact and whatever current affairs that have been there in the past 1 year in the area of climate change. Then I'll talk about ecosystem, its degradation and issues. But mind my words, guys, I'll be only discussing the ecosystems that have been in news. Like if there is a specific wetland in the news, if there's a specific forest in the news, we'll talk about those things, what have been the issues of degradation and what have been the conservation initiatives. But when you talk about issues here, under the issues part, this is one area where you can expect a question in mains as well. So I'll be restraining myself in diving into that much of details where we enter into the realm of mains, because we want to keep the course strictly within the boundaries of prelims exam, so that this course helps the student to the maximum in clearing the prelims exam. Right, so I'll keep my entire discussions, its depth and its coverage within the prelims limit. Right, then we'll talk about the loss of biodiversity and its conservation. Here we'll talk about if there is any animal or any specific component of the biodiversity, plant, animal or any other organism which has been in the news in the past 1 year or past 1.5 year, and also if there is any conservation initiatives launched by the government of India or a specific state government in protection or in revival of a certain species. Then we'll talk about the animal and forest related issues as well as some initiatives. Here I'll talk about the animal and forest related laws and if there is any initiative based on those laws in the recent times. Like you must have heard of the Forest Conservation Act of 1980. It has been recently amended, but and then there has been a following case in the Supreme Court against it. So we'll talk briefly about what these laws are, what is their objective and what is the issue, why they have been why they have been amended, considering the future challenges. Then we'll talk about water crisis and pollution. This is a very hot topic, guys. There is always a crisis associated to water. Now this is also a topic that partly goes into mains and partly is important from prelims point of view. Here we'll talk about water issues, if there have been any issues specifically in the country related to water crisis, what is the general idea of water crisis, what are the various guidelines that have been introduced, Mihir Shah committee guidelines, all those things we'll see in brief, but we'll keep it to the level of prelims only so that students are maximum benefited. Then we'll discuss some of the other pollution related laws. Now this is going to be a holistic introduction only of all the all the laws in the country. Like we have got the Insecticides Act which talks about pesticides, we have got Atomic Energy Act which talks about radioactive waste management, we have got the we have got Environment Protection Act, we have got Air Act, Water Act, then we have got the recently passed Campa Act which talks about deforestation and such. So we'll talk about all these pollution related issues and laws. So again we'll try to keep it to the extent of prelims exams only. This is again one topic which has a very wide angle application in mains as well. Then we'll talk about the recent pollution related news, specifically on plastic. You guys know that plastic has become a kind of a forever chemical today. It is found almost in every every ecosystem of the country. In fact, it has been found in the deepest waters of the world also. So we'll talk about plastic, we'll talk about e-waste, we'll talk about other pollution related acts like Environment Protection Act, we'll talk about air pollution related laws and initiatives, and we'll also talk about hazardous waste. Hazardous waste has not been covered in a specific act of the parliament, but it is one topic which is very popularly covered or discussed in various laws of the country. So we'll talk about hazardous waste in general, and then we'll talk about various initiatives that are there internationally taken up to manage hazardous waste. And then the next topic of our discussion will be land degradation. Now land degradation also, if you look at its entire vertical, it would have a lot of issues related to indigenous people. It has a lot of issues related to PVTGs and tribal population, forest dwelling individuals. But here also we'll try to refrain ourselves only to UNCCD, United Nations Convention on Combating Desertification, and if there is any other news related to desertification and land degradation specifically related to prelims, we'll talk about that. And then last topic that we'll discuss is environmental justice. This is again a topic which is mostly a part of mains exam, but we'll try to refrain ourselves and cover the things like what is NGT, what is the rules and regulation of NGT. If there is a specific verdict that NGT has given that requires or that can have a question in the prelims, we'll talk about that part also. So mind my words, the entire discussion would be mostly surrounding around the prelims exam pattern only. So the entire discussion would be around the prelims exam pattern, and that will be our approach throughout the syllabus. Now, what is going to be the reference that I have taken here? The primary reference of our discussion comes from the two books of PMFIS. You already know PMFIS Environment. It is our go-to textbook for all the environment-related initiatives, for all the environment-related information, literature, whatever we can cover. You can use the PMFIS Environment as the go-to textbook. And then the recently published, the PMF Prelims Magnum 2025 on environment. This talks about, or this has given a very good description of all the current affairs that has come up in the area of environment in the past 1 year, right? So I'll be further adding off if there is any relevant information that may be required from the prelims point of view. And I'll also be covering things like Down to Earth and the Hindu newspaper, which would also have some information in the current affairs considering the prelims only. So this is going to be our reference material. So this has been the initial pitch that I would be covering in the subject. Now let us start with the first topic. The first topic of our discussion is climate change. All of you are aware of climate change. None of you are alien to this topic. All of you are aware that the world climate is changing. We often use the word global warming, right? Now guys, remember that it is not the first time that the climate has changed. Historically also, the global climate has always been changing. It has never been static. It has always been changing, guys. So in contemporary times, the current climate change is associated with global warming. Global warming is the term that has got the popularity in the recent time because ongoing climate change is making the earth warmer. Now, on what basis we say that the earth is getting warmer? If you look at the average temperature, of earth, it is close to 15 degrees Celsius. 15 degrees Celsius considered as the average temperature of planet Earth. And if you compare this temperature in the past 100 years or the past 200 years of industrialization, we are witnessing that the average temperature has been increasing. And in the past, it was increasing by a very minute margin. But now the climate change is so visible, it's so evident that according to almost every report, NASA has been publishing reports on this now. The World Meteorological Organization have published reports on this. We have even ISRO publishing reports on this, that the global temperature of the world is increasing. In some places, it is rising by a much higher margin. So just to give you a little point of view here, it is said that the average temperature, which is 15 degrees Celsius, it is already said that it has increased by up to 1.2 degrees Celsius. By the year 2023. By the year 2023, the average temperature has already increased by 1.2 degrees Celsius. That means previously it was 15 degrees Celsius, now it is 16.2 degrees Celsius. And guys, last year in 2024, when the entire world met at Baku in Azerbaijan, the average temperature already breached 1.5 degrees Celsius. 1.5 degrees Celsius. That means out of the entire year, the average temperature rose by 1.5 degrees Celsius than the average temperature for majority of the year. Guys, you must have heard that in the garb of climate change, you must have heard that winters are getting more extreme. So there is no doubt that sometimes winter can get even more extreme than the average winter temperature. But still the overall temperature throughout the year, it will be higher than the normal. So it has already breached 1.5 degrees Celsius. Although it has not been throughout the year, but on an average, it has been 1.5 degrees Celsius. I hope you guys can understand. So when we see the trend of increase in temperature, we associate this trend with an expression of global warming. So global warming is often considered as the average increase in temperature or the average increase in the global temperature, right? This is simply what is global warming. Now, if global warming is happening and we all are aware, then the question that comes is, what is causing the global warming? So global warming is caused by something called as greenhouse gases. There's something called greenhouse gases, and greenhouse gases are the main culprit of global warming. So when I talk about Climate change, so all of you have heard. Now what are greenhouse gases? So greenhouse gases are those gases which can impact the Earth's climate just like how a greenhouse works. All of you must have heard, in extremely cold countries, in extremely cold places, if you go to Greenland, if you go to the northern part of Canada, where the soil remains completely covered with snow for a fairly long period across the year, you would notice that people often make glass houses in those buildings. People often make glass houses. Those glass houses are not for them to live, but they are meant for doing some basic agricultural activities. They perform some basic agricultural activities by building glass houses. Actually, what does glass do? Glass have a very interesting tendency that it allows the infrared rays. It allows the infrared rays. Remember, when you look at the sun spectrum, when you look at the total spectrum of the solar radiation, you would notice that sun produces a total of 7 types of radiation. Starts from radio waves, microwaves, infrared, visible light, ultraviolet light, X-rays, ultraviolet light, X-rays and gamma rays. These are the 7 types of radiations that our sun emits. So our sun emits these 7 types of radiations ranging from radio waves, microwaves, infrared, visible light, ultraviolet, X-rays and gamma rays. And when you look at these 7 radiations, 3 of these radiations, infrared, visible light and ultraviolet, they constitute nearly 90% of the total sun's radiation. So जो sun की सारी radiations है, out of it nearly 90% जो sun की radiation है वो सिर्फ 3 radiation से बनता है, that is infrared, visible light and ultraviolet light. So these 3 radiations, they cover 90% of the sun's radiation. I hope all of you get it. So सभी सातों रेडिएशन में 3 रेडिएशन है, इंफ्रारेड, विजिबल लाइट एंड अल्ट्रावायलेट लाइट. दे ऑक्यूपाई 90% ऑफ द सन्स रेडिएशन. अब देखो विजिबल लाइट, द विजिबल लाइट पार्ट दैट वी हैव, दिस इज रिस्पॉन्सिबल फॉर अवर विजुअल स्टिमुलस. हम जो भी चीज़ें आसपास देख सकते हैं, वॉट एवर कलर्स वी कैन सी, वी सी इट ओनली थ्रू विजिबल लाइट. यू गाइज नो विजिबल लाइट इज इटसेल्फ a combination of 7 different colors, Vibgyor we call it, right? Ultraviolet light, this one is partially dangerous for us, right? So it is partially dangerous. ये काफ़ी dangerous होती है. So we have the ozone layer for preventing its entry. So ultraviolet light can enter, but not all of ultraviolet light. Ultraviolet light mostly is of 3 types: UVA, UVA, UVB and UVC, out of which UVC is the most dangerous. It is the most dangerous. So this UV light is completely blocked from ozone layer. So ozone layer will block the UVC. It will not allow the UVC to enter earth. So even though sun produces, sun काफ़ी सारा ये तीनों radiation produce करता है, but the UV light prevents, UV light रोक देती है from these radiations to enter into the earth's surface, right? So UVC is prevented from entering because of ozone layer, right? The ozone prevents the UVC. UVB, this is almost 80 to 90% is prevented. 80 to 90% ozone will prevent the UVB from entering, and UVA, this enters conveniently into the earth's surface, into the earth's atmosphere. ये enter हो जाता है. So when you talk about the different radiations, UVA enters comfortably. UVA causes sun tanning. Whatever sunburns, whatever sun tanning that happens, Indians are naturally brown skin people, हम naturally brown skin है. All this is because of the adaptation that we have for UV light, right? So this is UV light, UVABC. Then B, UVB, almost 80 to 90% is still stopped. 80-90% is stopped from the ozone layer. But जो 10-20% enter करता है, this UVB, it can cause cataract. This can cause cataract. It is a type of an eye defect which basically causes milking of the eye lens. तो ये eye lens के ऊपर milking कर देता है, जिसकी वजह से आप you are not able to see things, right? As the person ages, the vision gets blurred. आपका blurring of vision हो जाता है, and if it gets extreme, then there is a permanent loss of eye vision, right? But thankfully we have got surgeries today which can cure the cataract, but it has to be cured as early as possible, right? And then secondly, UVB also is responsible for vitamin D absorption. आपने सुना होगा that sunlight is equipped or sunlight helps in vitamin D absorption in the body. Actually, sunlight does not carry vitamin D, but when you expose yourself to sunlight, it produces a certain chemical called calciferol, which is a pro-vitamin D. तो आपकी बॉडी में एक प्रो विटामिन डी प्रोड्यूस होता है जिसकी वजह से आपके लिवर में विटामिन डी का एब्जॉर्प्शन बढ़ जाता है वेन एवर यू आर एक्सपोज टू सनलाइट. ओके, सो दैट ऑल्सो हैपन्स इन UVB. So UVA सन टैनिंग करता है विच इज नॉट लाइफ थ्रेटनिंग. UVB कैटरैक्ट कर सकता है विच कुड बी डेंजरस फॉर द आइज, बट protecting your eyes with the right precautions is important. But vitamin D you get from UVB, right? So it is always good that you stand outside in the sunlight for some time. Half an hour of time every day is very good, but you have to keep your eyes protected. So wearing a good sunglasses or covering your eyes with something is always essential. But UVC is so dangerous that no exposure to UVC should happen. UVC के लिए कोई exposure नहीं होना चाहिए, and this is prevented from entering into the Earth's atmosphere, especially with the help of ozone light. So ozone gas, it prevents 100% of UVC absorption or 100% of UVC penetration. But yes, wherever there is an ozone hole, कहीं पे भी ozone hole अगर पाया गया है, you all must have heard there are places in Antarctica there is a ozone hole. You must have heard that there is ozone hole also in Arctic region. There is ozone hole discovered in Australia. तो जहाँ जहाँ पे भी ओजोन होल आइडेंटिफाई किया गया है वहाँ पे यूवीसी एक्सपोजर हो सकता है. सो इट इज़ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट दैट पीपल टेक राइट प्रिकॉशंस. दे शुड नॉट हैव डायरेक्ट एक्सपोजर ऑफ सनलाइट विद देयर स्किन, राइट? अदरवाइज इट कैन कॉज अ काइंड ऑफ स्किन कैंसर नोन एज मेलानोमा. मेलानोमा एक तरह का स्किन कैंसर है जो यूवीसी एक्सपोजर से हो सकता है. आई होप ऑल ऑफ यू अंडरस्टैंड. सो यूवी लाइट, दिस इज द पार्ट ऑफ सोलर स्पेक्ट्रम. विजिबल लाइट, दिस इज ऑल्सो पार्ट ऑफ सोलर स्पेक्ट्रम. बट इसके साथ साथ जब हम बात करते हैं इंफ्रारेड लाइट की, इंफ्रारेड लाइट भी सोलर स्पेक्ट्रम का पार्ट है. और ये क्या कैरी करता है? दिस कैरी हीट. सो हीट जितनी भी प्रोड्यूस होती है सनलाइट में, द मोमेंट यू पुट योर हैंड इन द सन, आप जब कभी सनलाइट में अपना हाथ रखते हैं आप महसूस करते हैं कि आपका हाथ तो दिख रहा है, आपको विजिबल लाइट है, बट एट द सेम टाइम द हैंड गेट्स वार्मर. दिस डज नॉट हैपन इफ आई पुट माई हैंड अंडर एलईडी लाइट. मैं एलईडी लाइट के नीचे हाथ रखता हूँ तो मुझे सिर्फ हाथ दिख रहा है, बट आई कांट फील दैट द लाइट इज वार्मर. मतलब मैं अपने हाथ में गर्माहट को महसूस नहीं करता हूँ. द रीजन इज बिकॉज एलईडी लाइट इज सिंपली एमिटिंग विजिबल लाइट, बट द सनलाइट इज एमिटिंग विजिबल लाइट प्लस इंफ्रारेड लाइट. वैसे तो काफ़ी सारी हैं, बट विजिबल लाइट और इंफ्रारेड लाइट अर्थ के सर्फेस तक टच कर रहा है. सो इंफ्रारेड लाइट कैरीज द हीट ऑफ द सन. एंड गाइज व्हाट डज ग्लास डू? ग्लास क्या करता है? ग्लास अलाउज द इंफ्रारेड रेज टू एंटर. तो जो हीट कैरिंग रेडिएशन है सन की वो एंटर तो कर सकती है बट यहाँ से एग्जिट नहीं कर पाएगी. सो व्हेन द इंफ्रारेड लाइट tries to move out from the glass does not allow the infrared light to go out, right? So infrared radiation can enter but it cannot go out of the glass, and because it cannot go out of the glass, what happens? The temperature of the entire glass house or the greenhouse increases, and sometimes it increases to such an extent that you can practice some basic agriculture. You can practice some basic agriculture in that greenhouse. So this is a very common practice in extremely cold places. In the northern part of America where it gets really cold in the winters, the entire soil gets covered with snow. In Canada where the entire soil remains covered with snow, you can still convert or you can still perform some basic agriculture with the help of greenhouses. I hope all of you understand. In India also guys, this greenhouse concept is not new. We are also having this concept. We call it poly houses, because in India we do not require a permanent setup, because in the summers the temperature is ambient for most of the agriculture. So if you need to grow some tropical fruits or tropical vegetables even in the winters, you can obviously put up a poly house around the agricultural field, और वहाँ पे आपको टेम्परेचर उतना मिल जाएगा जिसमें आप कुछ बेसिक वेजिटेबल्स एंड हर्ब्स उगा सकते हैं even in the winters where the temperature can be extremely cold, right? So this is what we have even in India. So this is the concept of greenhouse. Now why it is called greenhouse gases? तो होता क्या है, जैसे ये ग्रीन हाउस इस पूरे हाउस के अंदर के टेम्परेचर को मैनिपुलेट करके वार्म कर देता है, द सेम थिंग सम गैसेस विल डू. तो कुछ गैसेस क्या करती हैं? इफ दिस इज प्लैनेट अर्थ, देयर आर सम गैसेस which traps infrared light in the same exact way how the glass would trap infrared light. That means ये infrared light को allow तो कर देगा, infrared light would be able to enter easily through these gases, but the moment when it will try to exit, when it will touch the earth's surface and reflect back into space, यहाँ पे infrared light को रोक दिया जाएगा, it will stop, right? And why it will stop? Because the reflected infrared light will have a slightly less energy, will have a slightly longer wavelength, and that light will not be allowed to escape out into the earth, into space. And it will be the same phenomena what glass did in the greenhouse, these gases are doing for atmosphere. और जैसे ये इंफ्रारेड लाइट, जैसे यहाँ पे इंफ्रारेड लाइट को ट्रैप कर लेंगे, व्हाट विल हैपन? द टेम्परेचर ऑफ दिस रीजन विल स्टार्ट इंक्रीजिंग, और जैसे ही टेम्परेचर इंक्रीज होगा, विल सी दैट द एटमॉस्फेयर स्टार्ट्स गेटिंग वार्मर. बिकॉज ऑफ एटमॉस्फेयर आप देखेंगे that Earth's surface starts getting warmer, Earth's ocean starts getting warmer, and you will see that the overall temperature of Earth gets warmer. These gases which perform this greenhouse effect in the overall atmosphere are called greenhouse gases. Now, what are the most common greenhouse gases? We have carbon dioxide, we have methane, we have nitrous oxide, we have hydrofluorocarbon, we have perfluorocarbon, we have sulfur hexafluoride, we have nitrogen trifluoride, right? All of them are examples of greenhouse gases. Now guys, I'll give you a rule of thumb. एक thumb rule आपको देता हूँ जिससे आप greenhouse gas को identify कर सकते हैं. आप कभी भी whenever you have a gas which is triatomic, अगर कोई भी गैस आपको मिलेगी जो triatomic है, ट्राइएटॉमिक मतलब उसमें 3 एटम्स हैं, ध्यान से देखिए, CO2 3 एटम्स, 2 ऑक्सीजन 1 कार्बन, N2O 3 एटम्स, 2 ऑक्सीजन 2 नाइट्रोजन 1 ऑक्सीजन, ये सब ट्राइएटॉमिक है. सो ऑल गैसेस विच आर ट्राइएटॉमिक और मोर, अगर ट्राइएटॉमिक या ट्राइएटॉमिक से ज्यादा एटम्स हैं, मतलब 2 एटम्स अगर हैं तो वो डायएटॉमिक है, बट अगर ट्राइएटॉमिक या ट्राइएटॉमिक से ज्यादा एटम्स हैं, सो दोज गैसेस विल बी अ ग्रीन हाउस गैस. वो गैसेस अक्सर ग्रीन हाउस गैसेस होंगी. सो इफ यू टॉक अबाउट वाटर वेपर, यस वाटर वेपर भी ट्राइएटॉमिक है, 2 हाइड्रोजन 1 ऑक्सीजन, वो भी ग्रीन हाउस गैस है. इफ यू टॉक अबाउट ओजोन, O3 3 ऑक्सीजन एटम्स है, ट्राइएटॉमिक ग्रीन हाउस गैस. इफ यू टॉक अबाउट SO2 सल्फर डाइऑक्साइड 3 एटम है, ट्राइएटॉमिक ग्रीन हाउस गैस. If you talk about CO2 already covered, triatomic greenhouse gas. I hope all of you understand this. So whenever you have any triatomic gas or bigger or more, मतलब 3 एटम या 3 एटम से ज़्यादा हैं, तो वो गैस अक्सर एक ग्रीन हाउस गैस ही होगी. That gas will most likely be a greenhouse gas. I hope all of you understand. This is what we have under the basic concept of greenhouse gases. Now, because we have to narrow down our discussion to prelims only, so I'll be considering the greenhouse gases of these 6 types, which I have written already: CO2, CH4, N2O, PFC, HFC, hydrofluorocarbon, perfluorocarbon, SF6, and nitrogen trifluoride, NF3. These are the greenhouse gases that we'll consider. Now guys, in UPSC it is often asked regarding the sources of these greenhouse gases, but considering the past 1 year, I don't think we need to emphasize on sources of all these gases. सबके लिए ज़्यादा ज़रूरी नहीं है, but मैं quickly आपको बता देता हूँ. I want you guys to write it very quickly, बहुत जल्दी लिख लेंगे. तो CO2, remember any kind of developmental activity. If you consider any developmental activity, कोई भी developmental activity आप देख लीजिए, it will release CO2. Any kind of developmental activity will release CO2. Just imagine if you want to get your house constructed, आपको घर अपना construct करना है. What is the house made up of? It is made up of bricks, cement, right? RCC, iron. These are going to be there. If you look at iron is made from an ore called hematite. Hematite is an ore which has to first be put in a blast furnace so that you can extract the pure iron out of it. So in that process, the heating of the blast furnace is done through fossil fuel, and fossil fuel contains carbon. It will release CO2. So iron production is a massively CO2 contributing activity. Then cement is made from limestone, from lime, calcium oxide, CaO. The limestone have to be put in a blast furnace so that you can extract lime out of it. Again, that limestone, when it breaks down, it is calcium carbonate. When it breaks down, it makes lime plus CO2. So lime itself, this is lime and this is CO2. So lime production itself produces CO2, and the heating process of the limestone itself also produces CO2 because you are using fossil fuel for it. तो आप उसके लिए fossil fuel use करें तो वहाँ पे भी फिर से CO2 emissions हो गए. तो CO2 emissions will be contributed not only from iron but also in cement manufacturing. Then apart from this, the CO2 emissions will also be contributed in brick making. जब आप bricks बनाते हैं तो you make bricks from clay, but clay is put in a blast furnace or it is put in a furnace, right? So those furnaces are again running on fossil fuel, or even if it is running on charcoal or wood, it will still be producing CO2 in their burning. So you look at any developmental activity, it will produce CO2. You buy a car is mostly made up of iron. Iron is made from the same process of iron steel manufacturing. It will release CO2. And even when the car is running on fossil fuel, it will again be producing CO2. You look at any developmental activity. You talk about clothes. If you buy new clothes today, they are manufactured from cotton. Cotton is produced in agricultural fields. But to produce cotton, we are depending on urea, which is again produced from natural gas, which is methane. That there also CO2 is being emitted. Then apart from urea, you're also putting up pesticides. Pesticides are manufactured in factories which are again running on coal-based energy, which is again producing CO2. And then once the cotton has been harvested, the cotton is transported from the agricultural fields to the to the warehouse or to the yarns where it is going to be converted into a proper fabric yarn. In that process, the supply chain is running on fossil fuel. Those factories are running on fossil fuel. So likewise, when you look at all developmental activities, you will notice wherever any developmental activity is happening, it will produce CO2. So there is CO2 being produced in all developmental activities. So this will act as a thumb rule for you. But apart from developmental activity, there are a lot of natural processes. There are a lot of natural ways also from where CO2 can be produced. Few of the natural ways are natural decomposition of organic matter. So guys, when you look at organic matter or biomass is something which is usually made up of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, sulfur and those other similar elements. Guys, by the way, what is biomass, guys? Biomass is basically mass of an organism minus the weight of water. Like in general, humans, we have 70% water. So let's suppose if my weight is 100 kilograms, 70% of this weight is water. So my biomass would be 30 kgs. So what is biomass? It is considered as dry weight of an organism. Dry weight of an organism. मतलब weight of an organism minus weight of water. तो जितना भी organism का weight है, total weight minus the weight of water. So usually 70% is the basic idea that we keep. So you can consider 100 kg minus 70, 30 kilograms. So if my weight is 100 kg, 30 kg is my biomass. तो मेरा biomass का वजन होगा 30 kgs, right? I hope all of you get it. So biomass is normally made up of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, sulfur. So it's very obvious if carbon is a part of our biomass. And by the way, guys, nearly 50% of the biomass is carbon. आपके टोटल बायोमास का नियरली 50% हिस्सा कार्बन ही है. आपके टोटल बायोमास का नियरली 50% हिस्सा कार्बन है. सो कार्बन ऑक्युपाइज नियरली 50% ऑफ योर बायोमास. दैट मीन्स you have an entire biomass where 50% is carbon. So just imagine if this biomass starts decomposing. It will release CO2 if this decomposition is aerobic. अगर ऑक्सीजन के प्रेजेंस में डिकम्पोजिशन हो रहा है तो इट विल प्रोड्यूस CO2 एंड इट विल प्रोड्यूस मीथेन CH4. यू कैन सी मीथेन इज ऑल्सो ग्रीन हाउस गैस इफ इट इज एनारोबिक. सो अगर ये इफ दिस ब्रेक डाउन, इफ यू लुक एट इट, एरोबिक के केस में CO2 प्रोड्यूस हो रहा है विच इज द ग्रीन हाउस गैस, और एनारोबिक के केस में भी ग्रीन हाउस गैस ही प्रोड्यूस हो रहा है. So when you talk about natural decomposition of organism, it will release methane and CO2. So whenever you talk about any release of any kind of biological phenomena where there is a release of gases, it will definitely have CO2 in it. So whether you go for a volcanic eruption, if you look at a volcanic eruption, there will be a high emission of CO2 there. If you look at, wetlands, wetlands are places where the organic matter gets. Wetland is basically a place where soil hydration is more than soil aeration, where the soil air constant content is lesser and the soil water content is high. तो पानी की वहाँ पे ज़्यादा अवेलेबिलिटी होती है, the soil is fully covered with water, or the soil has more water content. That means all the organic matter, when it starts breaking down, wherever there is oxygen available, it will release CO2. Wherever oxygen is not available, it will produce methane. So these are the places which will obviously release a lot of CO2. So guys, you can just keep a simple argument in your mind that every natural process of breathing, of exhaling will release CO2. Every natural process of decomposition will release CO2. So almost there is no ecosystem on earth which does not emit CO2. So CO2 very likely is going to be produced from almost every source. So CO2 emissions is very high, is very widely distributed. When you talk about methane, methane is, the sources of methane and CO2 are mostly common when you look at naturally, but the primary difference is methane is a result of anaerobic decomposition. So whenever the breaking down of organic matter happens in the absence of oxygen, there you will see methane emissions quite high. So you will notice methane emissions, most of the methane emissions happening So guys, you will notice most of the methane emissions happening wherever there is anaerobic. If there is any possibility of anaerobic decomposition, then methane emissions is likely to be there. So if you talk about any kind of mining activity, it will release methane, right? Because you are trying to mine the minerals from the interior of the earth. So you will obviously have all the methane trapped in the soil and that will get released. So it will release methane. Then any kind of volcanic eruptions, right? Or any kind of mining is done, then naturally wetlands, marshes, swamps, all of them would be releasing methane because there is more soil hydration, there is less oxygen, less aeration in the soil, it will release methane. So methane is going to be released from all these sources. I hope all of you guys are able to get it. Methane will be contributed from all these sources, right? So anaerobic, right? Then guys, when you talk about man-made, when you talk about human-induced or man-made, or I should use a better word for it, anthropogenic. When you talk about anthropogenic or man-made activities of methane emissions, then for anthropogenic activities, we have the biggest contributor. There are three major contributors here. One is your dairy industry. The dairy industry, right? I'll explain how it is. Second is your agricultural industry. Agriculture, especially rice, right? Rice or paddy, right? And thirdly, we have got landfills or what you called wastelands. वैसे landfills only should be the right word, right? Or garbage wastelands, okay? Landfills, where we put up garbage or any kind of organic, inorganic waste. Now guys, look at this. Dairy, how does dairy contributes in methane emissions? So guys, when you look at most of the dairy animals, right, cows, buffaloes, we often call them as bovines. Bovine is a word that is often used for identifying cow-like animals. Cow-like animals, we call them bovines, right? Sheep-like animals are called ovines, just for your knowledge. So cow-like animals are called bovines. Now the thing with bovine is, bovines are mostly ruminant cattle. Bovines are mostly ruminant cattle. What is ruminant cattle? Ruminant cattle basically means that when you look at the stomach, guys, in case of a human stomach, we have got one chamber. In case of the human stomach, we have got one chamber. But if you look at the stomach of a cow, a cow stomach has four chambers, guys. A cow stomach has four chambers, where the first chamber is called rumen. The first chamber is called rumen, right? And this rumen that is present in the cow stomach, this contains, naturally it contains some methanogenic bacteria. It contains some methanogenic bacteria. Methanogenic bacteria means the bacteria that will generate methane whenever it breaks down. See, remember, there are some bacteria which are anaerobes. I'm going into a slight realm of biology, but remember, when you talk about bacteria as such, there are some bacteria which are aerobes. Aerobes are those bacteria that will survive only in the presence of oxygen. They will perform only in those ecosystems where oxygen is always available, right? And there are some bacteria which are anaerobes. So anaerobes are those bacteria which will perform or which will survive only when there is lack of oxygen. So those ecosystems where there is lack of oxygen, you will have anaerobic bacteria. So the bacteria that we have on our skin, this is most likely be aerobes. These are aerobic bacteria. These bacteria are likely to be surviving in this environment. But the bacteria that may be present in our gut, the bacteria that may be present in our intestine, gut, here oxygen doesn't go there. So those bacteria could be anaerobic bacteria. Similarly, in the stomach of the cow, most, it is not the lungs of the cow. So mostly the cow is going to inhale oxygen that will go into the lungs of the cow. The stomach of the cow will have anaerobic methanogenic bacteria. So because it is anaerobic bacteria, it will normally produce methane. It will produce methane. So what happens, have you ever noticed that whenever you feed anything to a cow, whenever you feed something to a cow, cow को जब भी कुछ खाना खिलाते हैं तो आपने ऑब्जर्व किया होगा कि जो गाय होती है वो बाइट नहीं करती है, डजंट बाइट फूड, इट swallows the entire food. वो पूरा खाना एक बार में swallow करती है. So it will swallow the entire roti. So if you feed anything to a cow, वो cow पहले पूरा वो खाना swallow करेगी. Now when she swallows the food, the swallowed food goes into the rumen first. वो पहले rumen में खाना जाता है और जैसे वो rumen में जाएगा, these bacteria that are present, जो bacteria naturally rumen में present है, वो उस food पे act करेंगे and they will start breaking down this food and release a lot of methane. So food को break down करके एक partially digested substance में convert करते हैं, which is called cud. Cud is a partially digested substance जो cow के rumen में develop होता है with the help of the methanogenic bacteria. Now this cud, ये जो cud एक बार produce हुआ, now this cud is something that the cow chew. So जो गाय होती है वो हमेशा कुछ ना कुछ chew कर रही होती है, but that chew is not, that the thing that she's chewing is not food, it is actually cud. So what happens once the cud is produced, now the cow is going to push this cud back into her mouth. So she is going to literally vomit that cud back into her mouth and then she will start chewing the cud. But in this process of throwing the cud into the mouth, she releases a lot of methane. A lot of methane is produced. In fact, you'll be surprised to know, out of all the anthropogenic methane, हम जितने भी methane humans या human made establishment से release होती है, you'll be surprised to know 41% of this methane is produced from dairy and paddy. 41% methane ये केवल dairy और paddy से produce होती है. So dairy and paddy ये दोनों मिला के 41% ऑफ टोटल मीथेन एमिट करते हैं, जो एंथ्रोपोजेनिक मीथेन है. एंथ्रोपोजेनिक गाइस, नॉट नेचुरल, एंथ्रोपोजेनिक मीथेन, जिसमें से डेयरी का कंट्रीब्यूशन लगभग 33% है एंड पैडी का कंट्रीब्यूशन लगभग 8% है, राइट. सो दिस मच इज द परसेंटेज. सो इमेजिन इफ we can reduce just the emissions of methane from dairy and the emissions of methane from paddy, हम बहुत मेजर मीथेन emissions को कम कर सकते हैं. And guys, there is a research, Food and Agriculture Organization of United Nations, they have given one report where they have mentioned how we can manage the methane emissions, right? So they have given some suggestions which I will be talking about in the subsequent topics as we go ahead. तो अभी थोड़ी देर बाद ही उस बारे में बात करेंगे, पहले इनको समझिए. सो डेयरी और पैडी से लगभग 33% और 8% मीथेन एमिशंस होते हैं. अलॉन्ग विद दिस सो दिस इज मोस्टली कॉज बाय दिस रूमिनेंट कैटल. सो जितने भी कैटल जिनके अंदर रूमिनेंट है, जितने भी कैटल जिनमें रूमेन है, मोस्टली बोवाइंस, रूमिनेंट कैटल, रूमिनेंट. सो रूमिनेंट कैटल, सो वॉट एवर एनिमल्स दैट आर काउ लाइक, जिनको बोवाइन कहा जाता है, ये सब रूमिनेंट कैटल हैं. और जिन जिन एनिमल्स में रूमेन होता है वो सब नेचुरली मीथेन प्रोड्यूस करते हैं, राइट. बट आई होप यू कैन अंडरस्टैंड वी कैन स्टिल मैनेज दिस मीथेन. हम इसको नेचुरली मैनेज कर सकते हैं. इसके कुछ लाइफस्टाइल चेंजेस हैं, एंड इफ नॉट लाइफस्टाइल चेंजेस देन देयर आर सम चेंजेस दैट वी कैन डू इन द डेयरी इंडस्ट्री. जैसे वी कैन प्रोवाइड सम बेटर फीड मैनेजमेंट टू द काउ. अगर काउ का फीड मैनेजमेंट बेटर रहेगा तो इट हैज़ बीन फाउंड आउट दैट मीथेन एमिशंस कैन बी रिड्यूस्ड significantly. If the cow is selectively breeded with those varieties of cow which has less methane emissions, then they could be better reduction. So likewise they have given some suggestions. I'll be talking about those suggestions eventually after some time. So these are the ruminant cattle. So ruminant cattle of the dairy industry contributes nearly 33% and rest 80% paddy. और guys इसके अलावा जो third major source था that was landfills. लैंडफिल्स आर बेसिकली लेगेसी वेस्ट साइट्स. तो आप गूगल करके देखेंगे जब भी कभी कोई भी लेगेसी वेस्ट साइट आप ऑब्जर्व करेंगे, आई विल शो इट टू यू. मैं आपको दिखाता हूँ. चलो एक मिनट. लैंडफिल्स, सो लैंडफिल्स क्या होती हैं? ये ऐसी साइट है जहाँ पे कचरा पीढ़ी दर पीढ़ी जमा होता जा रहा है. वी कॉल देम लेगेसी वेस्ट. सो लेगेसी वेस्ट इज बेसिकली दैट काइंड ऑफ वेस्ट वेयर वी हैव बीन सिंपली डंपिंग वेस्ट फॉर वन ओवर द अदर फॉर जनरेशन आफ्टर जनरेशन. तो अगर आप कभी दिल्ली आते हैं तो आप देखेंगे दिल्ली में यहाँ पे 2-3 लेगेसी वेस्ट साइट्स हैं, राइट. ओखला है, गाजीपुर है. सो यू विल फाइंड लेगेसी वेस्ट माउंटिंग ओवर वन ओवर द अदर. तो जैसे इस लेगेसी वेस्ट को आप देखेंगे एक के ऊपर एक एक्यूमुलेट हो रहा है, तो व्हाट इज हैपनिंग, ऑल दैट वेस्ट दैट इज गोइंग अवे फ्रॉम ऑक्सीजन सप्लाई. अब जो आउटर वेस्ट है वहाँ पे तो ऑक्सीजन सप्लाई है, लेकिन जो इंटरनल वेस्ट है वहाँ पे ऑक्सीजन सप्लाई नहीं है. और बिकॉज वहाँ पे ऑक्सीजन सप्लाई नहीं होती है तो यहाँ से बहुत ज़्यादा मीथेन एमिशंस होते हैं. Methane emission is very high. In fact, guys, they have been initiatives. They have been initiatives from United Nations Environment Program called MARS, Methane Alert Response System. Methane Alert Response System of UNEP, United Nations Environment Program. Guys, ये जितने भी ऐसी टर्म्स हैं ये आपको लिखनी होगी because it is important that you remember these terms. These are things that can be directly asked in the prelims. ये directly पूछ सकते हैं prelims में. तो ऐसे बहुत से terms हैं जो मैं आपको concept के बीच में बताता चला जाऊंगा one after the other. So in this way you will be able to learn majority of the things and you will also be able to add those things in your notes so that the things get very much updated with current affairs. Although Mars अभी फिलहाल current affairs में नहीं है, ये current affairs में 2022-2023 में था, right? Because it was developed during that time. It is under the global methane pledge. तो मार्स एक ऐसा इनिशिएटिव है जहाँ पे wherever there is a methane release on the soil or on earth, तो United Nations Environment Program uses satellite images and they release that. They quickly ask the government or they quickly notify the state authorities that there is a significant release of methane in the region, and they provide this alert system. So this becomes a very good way of identifying methane emissions in the city. So in the country now, guys, Mars have already notified India. According to UNEP, they have been more than 100 occasions when they have notified India for release of methane from their territory. I hope you guys understand. So anthropogenic emissions में 3 major emissions जो होते हैं मीथेन के, वो dairy, rice and landfill से होगा. Apart from that, there are other sources like we have fossil fuel emissions, we have emissions of transportation of fossil fuels, we have our very own vehicular emissions. ये सब भी काफ़ी हद तक मीथेन emissions कर सकते हैं wherever leakages in the methane are there, right? So ये 3 major methane emission sources हैं. I hope you guys are able to understand.